Hi everyone, I'm Nikki Christmas, founder and editor of Practically Perfect PA, and your host for this week's Future Assistant Global Summit. We are taking our event across the whole week, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our keynote session tonight. You are in for an absolute treat. I'm so delighted to welcome Kiran Singh Sirah, who is the president of the International Storytelling Centre, coming to us from the States. In the next hour or so, he's going to help you understand storytelling as a community building tool. He will explore storytelling as a powerful way to explore your values and cultivate collaboration, which we all need so much at the moment. And lastly, you'll have a better understanding how to use storytelling to help build leadership and teamwork, foster diversity and inclusion, and cultivate meaningful dialogue around important issues. I'd love to welcome Kiran to the stage tonight. Hi Kiran, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's great to be here, Nicola.
Brilliant. As I said, everyone, you are in for an absolute treat. Kiran is going to talk us through everything we need to know about storytelling in business and how it's going to help you as an assistant. And there's going to be some interactive sessions as well. So what I would love you to do is grab a pen and paper to take notes, but also to take part in the activity that Kiran's going to talk us through. And at the end of it, if there is anybody brave enough to come onto stage with us and talk us through how they did the exercise that Kiran's going to show us, that would be fantastic. If you also have any questions or you want to get involved in the conversation, there is a chat box down the side of your screen where we've just asked you now where you're from and what your role is. Then feel free to use the chat box. I'll be on there during Kiran's presentation as well. So for now, as I said, you are in for an absolute treat. So over to you, Kiran.
Wonderful, thank you. You built me up. Well, anyway, buenos dias or buenas tardes. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Or as I like to say now, living in Appalachia in East Tennessee, namaste, y'all. That's my greeting. So my name is Kiran Singh Sirah, and I'm the president of the International Storytelling Centre based right here in Jonesboro, Tennessee, small Appalachian town in East Tennessee. Now, before we begin, as Nicola mentioned, it'd be great if you could keep a notepad or a pen or pencil next to you, because there are going to be some specific notes that I'd like you to consider and write down during this talk, because I think it will really help the process. Now, I'm here today to talk about storytelling, and I want to start with a quick show of hands. Some of you I can see, some of you I can't, but just if you could bear with me and use your imagination, just maybe raise your hand if you agree. How many of you think of yourselves as storytellers? Great. Well, in my line of work, I'm inundated with stories all day, every day, and stories are one thing that I believe in passionately. And I say you're all storytellers because to tell your story is a universal human right. It's a universal cultural expression, one of the greatest tools that we have. Now, at the International Storytelling Centre, or ISC as we call it, we are most known for our flagship project, and that is curating and hosting the National Storytelling Festival. And we're going to host our 50th annual festival in 2022. It's grown to be considered the world's oldest and largest public event exclusively devoted to the performing arts of storytelling. But we also work heavily in the field of what's called applied storytelling, and that is the idea of using stories to address real-world challenges, real life, and build individual and collective empowerment. It is a practice that uses stories to foster healing, peace, and connection across a diversity of fields, and that can include healthcare to education. It can include government to arts and culture, as well as the mom and pop shows to multinational corporations. Storytelling is an ancient art. There's a belief that the most powerful force in the universe is the power of thought. If that is true, then the most powerful means to communicate that thought is through story. Storytelling is one of the most valuable tools that we have, not only helping us to promote our organizations or our projects, but also to bring about peace and dialogue, trust, collaboration, understanding, inclusivity, all of things that are very important. And these are the types of things that can help foster a stronger and healthy community. Essentially, what stories do is they build empathy. And I like to think of story less as a linear process, with this idea that it has beginning, middle, and end, but more of a tapestry. So thinking about that. Now, often I'm asked, how do I tell the most compelling story in 3 minutes? Now, personally, I believe the elevator pitch went out of style in the 80s. So that's not a talk on how to build one. Instead, what we're going to do is focus on, when telling our stories, is how can we bring justice, truth, to the story that needs to be told. For example, when the Italian Renaissance artist Michelangelo was asked to paint the Sixtine Chapel, he did not learn to paint in a quick workshop on how to paint. He learned the tools of paint theory, composition. He learned how to break those rules and apply his soul. And like any practice, it takes time and patience and the application of heart and soul to get it right. And it also requires a deep dive into seeking out the truth for yourselves. That is where we find that true, authentic voice, which not only communicates with others, but can also be your guide in life. So if you're thinking, how do I start? Well, remember, we use stories all the time. We tell stories around the lunch table with our colleagues, at the pub with our friends, on holiday with our families. We are all storytellers, and storytelling belongs to all of us. It might also be helpful to think about this. Consider your story tapestry as consisting of 3 main parts. That's what I'm going to focus on. These 3 parts are what Professor Marshall Gans calls a public narrative. And they are simply a story of self, a story of us, and a story of now. So let's start with the story of self. And you can write that down, story of self. The story of self is just that. It's a personal story. A story of self is a story of values, a story that shaped you into the person that you have become. And the chances are that you don't have one story of self. You're likely to have many, hundreds, perhaps thousands of stories that make up who you are. I don't have time to talk through all of them today, so I want you to think of what's most vivid, the story that comes to mind, the story that you often return to again and again that helps to ground you. I want you to think first about your personal story. Perhaps it's a story from your childhood. Perhaps it's a series of events that are all coalesced into one story now that you're older. Here's one of mine. So I grew up in Eastbourne, England, right on the coast. As the crow flies 50 miles south of London, you could see France on a clear day. When I was a kid, I remember being just like any other kid, going outside, playing on my bicycle, climbing trees, doing all those things that kids do near our house. You know, the world was like the lock, the street, the neighborhood. That's as far as we knew, and that's all we knew. But as a kid that stood out, my family came to Britain as refugees, escaping war and persecution in Uganda. I was the first person of color ever born in that small English town where I grew up. There was also a lot of racial tension at that time. A neo-Nazi knocked me from my BMX bike when I was just 5 years old, and I have 26 stitches on my face. I've been beaten up so many times that I've lost count. I've had my head stomped on. I've woke up in hospital. I would be bullied and sometimes called a silly immigrant or curry boy and other derogatory names. I'd run home. We lived right across the street. And my mother would be quick to tell me stories of our heritage. Now, my mother was my primary teacher. She was my guide, my philosopher, inspiration, storyteller, and she was also a registered nurse. And I always remember her white nurse's outfit and her upside-down watch. I looked up to her in so many ways. I had many experiences of trying to grow up and make sense of a very chaotic and what seemed like back then a very violent world. My mother's solution to help me make sense of who I am and who I was to tell me stories of my grandparents when they were freedom warriors in India, as people that came from rural backgrounds, farmers and carpenters, that took on the world's largest empire and won and freed 1 billion people. She told me stories about growing up in East Africa herself, in the tropical heat, stories of connection, of family gatherings, of warmth, of survival. And these stories helped to heal me. They helped me to imagine a bigger world than where I just come from. It helped me to reaffirm an identity from my past to my present. And then she would say, Go back into that playground and go tell them who you really are. My mother's stories helped me create a sense of self, a sense of place, and a sense of identity for me personally. I want you just to think for a second about your personal story. You can even write it down. There may be many, but you just jot it down. Just kind of make a note, even if it's a doodle or a picture, because you can always return to that. And that idea, just like we have hundreds of personal stories, we're also likely to have hundreds of professional stories. And these often overlap. I could tell dozens of personal stories that all relate to the work that I do today. But more than that, you have a professional story about why you do what you do. What led you to the work that you do now? For me, my professional story is also about hypothetical vandalism and theft. So let me go into that. I first started out in the arts and culture sector working in museums back in 2001. During that time, I met an education specialist who gave a talk at the museum that I worked at, the National Museum of Scotland. I was now living in Scotland. He said that the best way to connect culture to the people was to break down the walls of the museum, let material culture be free. He also advocated to let people come and take what rightfully belongs to them. Now, the idea resonated with me, and that's not because I'm advocating for breaking down the walls of any museum, but instead it got me to think about our roles as leaders in the communities that we serve, to think of ourselves as advocates for culture. How do we make our towns and community stories, or make our stories of place and of home, in equitable ways? How do we go about weaving these stories into collaboration to create a living museum without walls? So here I was, a museum professional working in a major British cultural institution, the National Museum of Scotland. We had objects that technically didn't always belong to us, thousands of them. And this was my first job in a museum. I was 24 years old. My role as a curator of education was to help present Scotland to the world and the world to Scotland. This presentation and the questions you brought up for me forced me to explore what I've come to believe in, that what a museum, and this relates to a compelling story, what it should essentially try to do is make sense of the world around us, to help us lead us back outside with a greater sense of empathy and understanding of the world that we live in. Not just our town or city or nation, but its changing place in a changing world. So how does that apply to us here, to you today? Well, simply this. Think about where your personal story and your professional story overlap. For me, I was suddenly thinking, what if we let all these museum artifacts and collections and exhibits go back to their metaphorical playgrounds and tell the world who they really are? What story from your personal life can point you to you and say, this was the moment or series of moments that led me to where I am now, what I'm doing today? This crossroads of stories is your story of self. It's a value. It's very important to who you are and your identity. So just take that moment, if there's any stories that come to mind for you, both personal, professional, or both, and just make a note, jot it down. This is something you can come back to. In a sense, it's your palette. It's your Michelangelo's palette. Next comes the story of us. This is the second part. The story of us is as the name suggests. It's a collective story that illustrates the shared vision or goals of a group. Now, first, I want you to think about who the us is in your life. Who comprises your organization? With whom do you work with most? With who do you work with least? Who are your audiences? Who are stakeholders? Your partners? Where are you in this organization? Questions to ask yourself. Are you serving tea to a group of executives? Are you one of the executives being served? Maybe you're not even in the room. You're waiting in the hall or out on the street. Wherever you are, think about the story of your organization from your perspective. What do you tell people about what you do and why you do it? With whom do you communicate with most? This is also about who is speaking in these scenarios. Who in your organization seems to have the microphone the most? Consider that. In 2016, On behalf of the International Storytelling Center, I was invited to Charleston, South Carolina. And this was to participate and lead a series of events that were all aimed at fostering healing and community dialogue. Now, Charleston is 5 hours drive from where I live. This is not very far in American terms. It's actually your neighbor. Of course, in the UK, that's halfway across the country, but it's not far. And I drove to Charleston. This was in response, the idea of the event was in response to a violent attack a few months prior when 9 people's lives were violently taken in a mass shooting that took place at Mother Emanuel Church. This is a predominantly black church. And this shooting happened when a young white male, influenced by the ideology of white supremacy, walked into a Bible study and shot 9 black parishes. The community healing event back then included a storytelling proclamation of friendship between our town of Jonesboro and the city of Charleston, a roundtable discussion of symbols, and a conversation with educators and artists. And finally, a workshop for students from the only inner city high school in Charleston, Burke High. I started off that workshop with the same question I asked all of you. How many of you think of yourselves as storytellers? But only a few hands went up. But then I asked them to think about what home meant for them. I asked the kids to describe their city, their lives, their family, their walk home from school, their favorite foods, their dreams and hopes and what mattered to them. And by the end of a 3-hour workshop, all of them had a story to tell. And one of those students was a young woman by the name of Chankisha Drayton. And she was one of the most soft-spoken kids in that group. But she decided to tell her story at a local storytelling event a few weeks later. She said she was tired of the way that people that looked like her, young and black, were portrayed in the news. So she wanted to tell her own story in her own words, in her own way, instead of somebody else telling her story for her. I think that's huge. Think about it. Because this was the process of her taking ownership over her own story, telling it in a way that makes sense to her, rather than having somebody else tell that story for her. This also meant that those in traditional positions of power had to relinquish some of their microphone time and allowed her voice to be amplified. Chankisha also took the trauma and the obstacles of her experience and rewrote her own narrative, turning it from one of pain into one of power. And it wasn't just powerful for her, it was powerful for me as a listener. That kind of power, the power to be heard and to be listened, is a kind of collective power story offers. It's one that we desperately need. This means sometimes we're the ones speaking and sometimes we're the ones listening. The story of us is just that. It's the story of us. Yes, our stories of self are vital to who we are and what we do, but to paraphrase John Donne, none of us are islands onto ourselves. Just as our personal and professional stories overlap, so do our stories of self and our stories of us overlap. Our work and our organizations are all impacted by this. They overlap. And the diversity of ideas and experiences that we bring can be our greatest strength if we learn to listen to one another's stories and find where they overlap with our own. We can use storytelling to build bridges we need with others, both inside and outside our organization. I often talk to donors, and that's essentially one of the main parts of my job, running a non-profit charitable organization. And I have to do that whenever there's time and possibilities to do that. And I usually tell them all about for example, the annual economic impact to our region that we create. Or I sometimes talk about the hundreds of jobs that we typically create year-round, or the thousands of children or at-risk youth we support year-round for underserved communities across our region. This is all great information. It's good stuff. But if I've learned anything in this business, it's not to underestimate the power of embedding your own story in building relationships. Talking about why you do what you do, not just what you do, and about the things that happened to you in your life that brought you to the conclusion that what you do and what your organization does matters. It's the connection of the story of self to the story of us. And it's the very thing you can use to form relationships with others. Now we discuss the story of self, which is your values, and the story of self, which is really a larger part of your story. Now we're going to look at the story of now, which is the third part. Now, the story of now is about the challenge this community now faces, the choices it must make, and the hope to which we can aspire. It's a story that is rooted in the values you celebrated in your stories of self and us, but it's also a contradiction to those values that require action. If it contradicts those values, if you believe in a certain idea, then it's in contrast to that, it's in contradiction to that. The story of now invites people to join you in taking hopeful action on the pressing challenge. It's the issues, concerns, or the urgency. For Greta Thunberg, it's climate action. For Malala Yousafzai, it's women's empowerment. For Emma Gonzalez, here in the United States, a high school student that witnessed her best friend die in a gun violence, for her, it's gun reform. So what do you hope for? I want to give you another example, someone you probably definitely have heard about, but someone that we really champion here in East Tennessee, Miss Dolly Parton. Now, she's a musical artist. She's an actor, an activist, all-round good human being. I sometimes call her the Majesty, the Queen of America. In Tennessee, she is the Queen, and I dare say God-like. It's easy enough to love Dolly for all the beauty she adds to the world, but we also love her because her story resonates with us. If the story of now is the story of addressing the challenges we face, then Dolly's story is one for the ages. Let me tell you a little bit about her story. So she grew up in a shack in the mountains, not far from here. She grew up in a shack at the end of a long dirt road, and she was dirt poor. But she left one day, went on a journey, a physical journey. Back then it was a far distance. It was just to Nashville, but that was a big deal back then. But she followed her dream. She made it big, and eventually she came home. She came home both physically and figuratively, and she shared her wisdom and her ideas and her stories of hopes and dreams with others. In 1995, inspired by her own father's inability to read and write, she launched what's called the Imagination Library, a program that began in her county, Sevier County, Tennessee, where she was born and raised. She sent free books to children every month from birth through age 5. And over the next 2 decades, the program has now grown to include every county in this country across the United States, but as well as Canada, Great Britain, Australia, and Ireland. When the wildfires ravaged the Smoky Mountains near us in 2016 and killed 14 people, destroyed thousands of homes and buildings, she organized a fundraising effort and raised $12 million in her My People's Fund. And most recently, Dolly has helped to fund the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. Dolly's story is one of constantly meeting challenges head-on and overcoming obstacles. Her story of now is deeply rooted in her story of self and her values. It's not just about her. Her story of now encompasses the story of us for her hometown, for her region, her state, her nation, her world. She's taken the values she learned as a young person and she's embedded it as a businesswoman, as an activist, as an artist. And I want to challenge you to do the same. Maybe we can't all be Dolly Parton. We want to be Dolly Parton. But she has a motto. It's dream more, love more, learn more, be more. Take that idea. Consider your story of self and where it intersects with the story of us. But also think about where these two narratives intersect to the story of now. And that is, what challenges are you and your organization trying to address? Perhaps it is fighting climate change or economic disparity. Perhaps it's about creating better healthcare access, improving community art programs. Why does that matter? Whatever it is, that challenge, that issue is the story of now. How do your stories of self and us intersect with the story of now? What values and stories can help you help you to lead your organization where it needs to be? And what values and stories are at odds with your organization? How can this story help make the world a better place? Is another way to think about it. Or your organizational mission. How does it tie in with that? Or perhaps your role or the people that you advocate for or serve. How can they be heard and seen and play a more significant role? Maybe right now you're not sure what your story of now is, and that's okay. But I would suggest just start by telling it anyway. Consider it and embed it in. It's about storying the future too. I want to travel back in time just a minute. Now, tell you a bit about the organization I'm with. The International Storytelling Center, I've been here since 2013, but the actual organization work began before I was born, about nearly 50 years ago, when a local high school teacher called Jimmy Neal Smith created an annual storytelling event that he boldly called the National Storytelling Festival. I say bold because it really was 60 people gathered around a wagon from the mountains of East Tennessee. And I'm pretty sure many of them were people he knew. But it didn't take long for the event to grow in its name. Nearly 50 years later, those 60 people have become 11,000. And that wagon has become 5 big-top circus-style tents. There was enough magic there to spark a movement and something Jimmy Neal likes to call a storytelling revolution. Storytelling revolution. Kind of has a ring to it, doesn't it? It sounds great. But when Jimmy Neal was first declaring 60 people around a hay bale and a wagon at a national festival, it wasn't hubris. It was a story of now. His now was to save a dying mountain town, and it did. Jonesboro was dying back then. It needed revitalization, and this was an effort to meet that challenge. Just like New Orleans is known for jazz, or Paris is known for the Louvre, New York is known for Broadway, Jonesboro is now known as storytelling capital of the world. It's the essence of our town. It's our town identity, branding, and storytellers from all over the world come and live here. As you move through this process, you may learn how to express your story of self more clearly as you tell it repeatedly. The shifting makeup of your community or organization may change as well in the story of us. And maybe the group takes on a new urgent challenge that requires a different story of now. That can change, especially if you're a health organization. It's constantly changing with new advice, new information. But Marshall Gans writes that you don't produce a final script of your public narrative, but rather you're learning a process by which you can generate that narrative over and over and over again, where you need it and how you need it. It's changing. A story doesn't have to be static. It's flexible. Now, similar to Michelangelo's 16th Chapel, it takes practice. It's your starting point to expand from. So what I want to do is actually close with a meditation. And this is a meditation that I use often to find my story. It's a process to which to go deeper, a deep dive. And you may just try it now, but hopefully you'll try it later when there's time available and there's quiet, because I think it's a really important process to finding the story from within, the true, authentic story. And what I like to do, I'm a Sikh, and we have often depictions in Sikh art where we have the image of our eyes half closed, and that's to symbolize that we are part in meditation, but we're also active and aware and mindful of what's going on in the world, particularly in justice, social justice. And the idea is they can inhabit both spaces. So I invite you to do what feels comfortable for you. If you want to close your eyes or half close, up to you. Now imagine you're in an elevator or a lift. I know earlier I said that elevators were outdated in the 80s, so this is a different kind of elevator pitch. It's your elevator. It can be as big as small as you want. The idea is you're starting to move in that elevator, and you can feel the sensation of upward movement. You're headed for the top, and now you know that when you get to the top, there's going to be this beautiful view. It's going to be absolutely incredible. You have that something to look forward to. But as you ride up this elevator, I want you to go through your life. Move upward in your life as if you move upward in the elevator. Imagine as you pass through the floors as phases, as pivotal moments, as liminal experiences, or other chapters in your story of self. Consider how you move through those moments. What did you overcome? What challenges did you address or face? What were the subtle or more overt moments that were transformational for you? Maybe it was subtle, maybe it was obvious, maybe it was a world news event, maybe it was something that was really connected to your experience, a conversation, a personal experience, whatever it might be. It's important to you that shaped you into who you are. Go from the early years to where you are now and move into the story of us. Think about how you got to where you are today and what you do today. You feel the elevator stop, and now you know you've reached the top. But before the doors open, think of your story of now. Think about where you want this story to take you and your organization. Perhaps this connects clearly to your organization or current role, or perhaps it doesn't. What story do you want to see? What story do you want to help create? Because here's the thing, this view, this amazing view that you've been promised at the top of this elevator, it's not a panoramic view of a major city. It isn't a sweeping vista or a bird's eye view of miles and miles of land. It's the view of the way that you want this world to be. It's your vision for the world. It might be foggy for now, and that's okay. But it might be very clear indeed. As the doors open, you begin to see this view from a distance. It could be about 5 minutes from now, that view of the world, or it could be 100 years in the future. But ultimately, it's a view of possibilities. You step off the elevator, and as you step out, you notice a small exhibit right in the center of the room, and it commands the small space that it has. There are very few. There are a few different artifacts in this exhibit, but right in the middle, in a place of prominence, is a picture of you. It's not a portrait; it's an action shot. You're doing something. You're actively engaged in whatever it is you're doing. And under this picture, there's a caption, a small paragraph that tells the story of how you got from where you are to this world that's right outside your window. It talks about what you did and what you contributed to help bring about the reality that you can now see from the top of this building. Maybe it's something you've already done. Maybe it's something you will do. Maybe it's something you know it will start, but ultimately might never ever finish because the work is too big and too important to fit into just one lifetime. It's a contribution to humanity's story, your community, something bigger. Hold on to this idea in your mind for a few moments and think about the details. This small description on that label is a call for action. It's your call for action. It's your purpose, it's your mission, it's your hope for the future. It may just be a word or two words. It may be something that you can, it's a little bit foggy, but it will become more clearer the more you do this, the more you think about it. But it's something that you're striving for in the work that you are passionate about doing. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Remember, storytelling is a process. It can help us to build more resilient, collaborative, equitable, diverse, and inclusive communities. It is a process that can take place between two people, two communities, two countries. It scales up, it scales down. Your stories of self, of us, of now, will not be written overnight, nor may they be completed in a lifetime, but they are worth writing. It is the place that you will find and discover your most authentic self, not just one that can help you in what you do today, but what will help you and guide you in your life story. Let's remember that great crucibles, moments throughout human history, have not only been defined by stories, but stories are what helped to create them. And so finally, if there is a cause that you care about, a policy, a movement, or an idea that is worth sharing, however complex, perhaps you're standing outside the conference room door and you want inside that room, or you want to create a new conference room for yourself. Remember, a story is not a 140-character tweet. It is a chance to harness your greater purpose, to create your own masterpiece, even if it takes a lifetime. So to begin with, I encourage you to take that idea, whatever it is, wrap it in a story or a series of stories, and the words of my late mother, go back into that playground and go tell them who you really are. Thank you all for listening.
Wow. I don't know where to start, and that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicola.
The first thing I want to do is just, there was so much to unpack in your presentation there, so I just want to give people a quick 10 seconds just to process that, because I think from everything you've said, we'll all be thinking about, going way back to our childhood and thinking about kind of what happened to us and the stories that we probably should share more often. So yeah, I just want to give people a couple of seconds just to gather their thoughts. And we are on the chat, so if you do have any questions, first of all, you can put them on the chat and I'll make sure to ask Kiran. And as we said, there was a process that we all went through there. So if anybody is brave enough to jump on the screen with us, I know Kiran would like to ask you a few questions and go through that process with you to see, and you tell us your story. So to do that, there's a little button just underneath me, just below here, which is a microphone. And you just grab the microphone, push the button, and then we'll be able to bring you on screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear from a brave person, whoever that is. And it doesn't have to be a question. It's just to describe the process. Somebody who wants to be brave to describe that process, what it was, anything that comes to mind, anything that you were surprised about, or did you go to a place of memory that you didn't realize was important to your story? And even if you want to share that, I think that would be very useful.
So I'd also just like to remind everybody that we are recording this session with Kiran. So as I said, I know there was a lot there, and I'm definitely going to go back and watch it because there's so much we can pull out to build connections with people. So Kiran, I've got a few questions for you while we're waiting for a brave soul to come and join us on screen. Or ask any questions in the chat.
Namaste coffee as well.
I've got a couple of questions for you if it's okay.
Yeah.
The first one that I wanted to ask, one of the challenges that assistants come up with, and it's a bit of an age-old challenge, is that some people don't understand what assistants do and what we can offer. So I wondered if there was anything around storytelling that we could use to effectively change opinions on the work that we do.
I think, yeah. I mean, obviously, I think if people get a sense of if one was to kind of process what's important to you about why you do a certain thing, then I think drawing from your personal narrative what you're contributing to. And, I'll give you an example. Like during the pandemic, we've been training a lot of essential healthcare workers. Mm. And we started it during the lockdown. And I reached out to one of our partners. We work in partnership with healthcare. And one of the things that we did is when the lockdown first hit, we did a 30-minute storytelling training for nurse practitioners, people that were grappling with the challenges that they face as people on the front line, or how are we going to call that? And what we did is I asked them just to simply to keep a journal. Now, I've been keeping a journal since I was 6 years old. And don't underestimate what a journal can do, because what you're doing is you're making sense of your own story, your experiences. And if you were to do that just for a week, I guarantee you that if you just do 10 minutes a day, write down your journey to work, the smiles, the interactions, the moments, the thing that surprised you. Because what was happening back then is that they were also grappling with being parents, spouses. They were grappling with all the anxieties that we were facing as me personally, not as a non-essential worker, but at the same time asked to do a job that was they haven't necessarily been trained in, because they haven't been trained in the circumstances of, and maybe having to deal with someone that might be dying. So how do you become this listener to witness someone's story? That's such a sacred thing. They can't have family. So what I try to do is do that, because the reason being is that in the trauma of fire, imagine that, it's very difficult to see your story. So what you do in that process is you go back to a place where you understand who you are, what you do. And that bringing that to the surface will kind of give you a kind of greater sense of seeing your purpose, of why, reminding yourself what you do, why you got into this field in the first place, why you're not selling cars on Wall Street, but you're in an industry that's about service, making the world better, building humanity, saving lives, medicine for the soul. I mean, this story, So it was about kind of reminding people about that. And I think one of the simplest things one can do is just keep a journal every day. I keep an audio. I use Otter as an audio, and I write things down. I transcribe it. And it's a simple process to first get a sense of what brought you into this organization. Describing that moment. And once you get to that sense, naturally what will come to the surface. It's sort of like an organic process. You're giving water to it. That story will come to the surface as the more you think about it, harness it, cultivate it, and practice it. Practice just talking to your peers and friends. And when the moment's right, when you're given the microphone, I guarantee that story will come to the surface. You could speak with authority and passion from the heart about why you do what you do. And I think that would be really helpful in the staff rooms, in the offices, in the meetings, and give you a chance to speak up. Remind those people around you and connecting it back to your purpose, and then help them to see you. Basically what you're doing is helping them to see you, understanding your story.
Yeah, that's so true. It's that why you do what you do rather than what you do, and that becomes so much more powerful, doesn't it? I think, as you said, it connects with that authenticity that it can be hard to bring to work, but if you can bring it to work and bring it to the office, it really helps build those connections, which is something assistants really have to do. It's such a huge part of our role.
And maybe just to add to that experience, now I grew up in South England, but I lived in Scotland for many years. And a big part of my job in Scotland, in Glasgow and Northern Ireland, where I worked, was to challenge sectarian violence. And the reason why I did, so what I did, I told my personal story about growing up in South England, and it was during a time there was a lot of racial tension and etc. But what I witnessed was a change of ideas that we can defeat racism, things can improve. And why I was working with people, I wasn't an executive, for example, but I was somebody that was kind of lower down in the tier of politics, right? In a big city authority. So I was trying to advocate and say, I want to do this because I believe that we can, but the relationship between racism and sectarianism, one is to do with race, one is to do with religion, but both are to do with fear and hate. And if I can see that challenge in my own lifetime, I want people in Glasgow and Northern Ireland to see the benefits of what can happen when we come together and challenge fear and hate. And so I told my personal story to advocate for that idea and help Glaswegians and colleagues from Ireland to see that too, because they were in the middle of that kind of traumatic experience.
It goes to show the power that storytelling can bring, that it can change these huge issues that we have globally, and then just so personally as well. It's incredible what storytelling can do to connect people, and I think now more than ever, having those connections and being able to be authentic in those connections is so important. I wondered, from your experience over the last year with lockdown, I know it's something that we've all grappled with in so many different ways, but I wondered, in terms of storytelling, what impact do you think the lockdown has had on our ability to tell stories?
You know what? It's actually improved. It sounds really bizarre, right? But I believe storytelling as a shared experience is a sacred thing. Now, when it comes through filters of media, there's danger, because as we know in Nazi Germany, stories could be collected in a way through a media process to help manipulate. It could create a narrative that's very dangerous. It can demonize a group of people, as it did in Nazi Germany. They demonized Jews and Roma, disabled people, etc. It could create a war. Here in the United States, narrative can be used to create false narratives, QAnon, many of these dangerous groups or white supremacist ideas. But what I do think is very important that happened during the pandemic, more and more the desire to connect with people through the digital format is still sacred, because I don't have a media station, BBC or Fox News or CNN, telling you what my story is. I get to tell my story with you. I get to connect intimately, even if it's via digital format, but you're hearing it from me. So in a way, it's kind of taking out the middleman and giving us an opportunity to connect with each other. And one of the other things that it does, this is maybe very philosophical, but one of the most creative spaces to harness your story is what we do in a liminal space. And that's a space in between. So imagine when you go on an airplane journey, there's a real deep thinking process that happens when we're between A and B, transitioning. Like our college years, we go in as children, we come out as adults. That's a liminal space. We have these rituals, and that's why a front porch is like we're neither inside nor outside, you're both. You're going into a liminal, it's a physical liminal space. The pandemic, before and after, is a liminal space. In this space, we've been doing deep dive processing for ourselves. This is the time to write it down. I'll tell you why. In 100 years from now, when people look back, they're not interested in the big news stories that came on BBC. They're interested in your journal. What was it like for a nurse practitioner, a farm worker, an individual, a parent? They want to read your journal. Your story really is going to have so much value for future generations. And that's what we're doing during a pandemic. We are unpacking the good, the bad, the ugly, because it all matters. To understand the full story, we have to understand the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, I think as well from my experience of the last year, the veneer has come down to a certain extent because so many of us are now working from home. That, you know, that suit of armour that you used to put on when you went into the office has dropped. Now everybody sees what's behind you, what your house looks like, your kids running across the screen, and there's that level of authenticity, I think, now. And you have to share what's going on in your life. I think you said the story of now. We're all sharing our current story of now because everybody can see it, which they weren't doing when we were coming into the office, you know, with our work persona on. So it feels very much that our stories of now, as we are, you know, for some of us not so much, but for many of us coming out of the pandemic, the authenticity of now is just so much more clear. And I think that's going to have a huge impact on how we work and how we do business now, because so many of us have seen behind the curtain.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that as we're kind of emerging back into this idea of coming together, that story of now, it's almost like a greater purpose. It's reinvigorating a mission. And the story of now is really that mission. The story of us is the collective. And it could be in the United States, it's the Constitution. It's in Britain, it could be living in a democratic society, right? And where we're free to express who we are. That's a story of us as a collective. And hopefully something we continue to have. In different parts of the world, it's going to be different. And it's not a story of nations, of us. It's a story of your organization, of a region. It could be the story of Scotland. Who are we? Or who are we as a nation? Or whatever, you know. And that idea of getting us to a place, if your mission is to get more kids digital equipment or whatever it might be, it's because that's a challenge. And when they do, it's like your theory of change. Think about it as a story of change. If this was to happen, if I can help to make this happen, because I have seen what happens when that does happen, then we'll have a better learning environment. I mean, so I talk about it in stories because I had the opportunity to hear stories when I was a kid, and it helped me through difficult challenges. But I believe if more young people had access to tell their own stories, then that would empower them to be whoever they want to be. So that's the vision. That's the story of now. That's the challenge. They can overcome adversity.
How do we go about encouraging people to tell us their stories? Again, it's something assistants have to do, make those connections often quite quickly, particularly with, you know, new colleagues or clients, or helping our executives to open up to us and quickly build those relationships. So I wondered if you had any advice on how to encourage storytelling in other people.
Yeah, I think there are simple techniques. Think about the questions that one asks. If you're doing a formal interview, I could ask you, so Nicola, I could say, what's your name? Right? Or I could say, what's the story behind your name? Right? That's the very simply basic thing that we carry with us. It's an identity we carry. And if I was to tell you, ask me, what's the story about? Well, my mother gave me that name because there was a heat wave in Britain in 1976. Kiran is Sanskrit meaning light, and she said I was like a light from the sun. Now that name could have multiple meanings, but I'm telling you a story. And so you think about the questions that one, and you're encouraging them to start telling that. Now, another way is help provide a very safe space, a comfortable space for storytelling to happen naturally. Where does that happen naturally? In pubs, at the bar, we come home for Christmas or Thanksgiving, or when we tell our children something at bedtime, or we go and see our grandma, our best friend. You don't talk in facts, you talk in stories. And you go, man, you won't believe this date I went on. It was an absolute disaster. You know what I mean? And we become the most exuberant storyteller when we're comfortable and have agency over an experience that I have ownership over. When I could tell you about what it was like growing up, or what it was like when I first arrived in the United States, the first day, I have agency on that because it's my experience. So you're giving people that agency, you're asking them, number one, you're asking a question that's open, and two, you're providing a space where that can happen. That could be a staff room. It could be even a simple series of questions. And I remember, back when I worked in Scotland, I entered this traineeship program, but it was the executive assistant, not the CEO of the Museums Association. It was Georgie, who we're still friends today. She had this beautiful relationship with me that she really was interested in me. Tell me about this stuff that you do. And she kept asking me these questions. And I think that's a really important part. And making sure that they have a space or in a sense, figuratively, metaphorically, a microphone. Giving them a space, a safe space, and know that their story matters. There's no good and bad, with no judgment. Your story matters.
Yeah, I think it's so important. It's that being curious, isn't it? It's being open and interested and being curious about other people. I think it's such an amazing skill to have as an assistant, really as anyone, but for assistants it's an amazing skill to have, to be the person that people want to tell their story to. Right. Especially when you are the linchpin to an executive who may be too busy to be as curious, or too senior, or slightly too scary. Being that safe space for colleagues is an amazing thing to be. I'm just going to see if anybody else has any questions, or if there was any brave souls who want to jump on. As you can see, we're not scary, so if there is anybody who wants to jump on and join us this conversation. Maybe, I don't know if you, Kiran, if you could let us know a little bit more about what you were planning to do with somebody, if they did come on, or maybe I can be the person that goes through that process with you. If you know, tell us a little bit more. There might be somebody who says, I can do that.
Yeah, I guess think, as I mentioned right in the beginning, think of your story as a tapestry. When I ask somebody, if I was to ask you, what's your story? Go blank. Don't ask that question. But I ask you a question, tell me about a moment in your life that you thought, that made you think differently about the world. For me, I was living in a hippie commune in Edinburgh. I was 24 years old. I came home from work, and with a backpacker, we watched the Twin Towers collapse on TV. Then that moment, in the days to come, it made me realize I was no longer a citizen of one country. I felt like a citizen of the world. My world mattered. I got active. I got politicized. I started to organize, and I started to organize events. And I really believed in this idea: people come together, share their stories, hear one another. We can build a better world. So it was a world event that made me think differently about the world. But there are also these subtle events. It was my mother who made me clean the shoes of pilgrims when I was about 6 years old, and she taught me this lesson, that always be willing to serve others as the children, she would say the children of God, that anyone, as long as you're willing to always serve another person, clean their shoes, I'm teaching you humility. So there was this kind of lessons. It was about, and it could be very, very subtle. And I give you an example. There's a great activist called Brian Stevenson in the United States. and he advocates for the ending of the death row of the death penalty. But he starts off with a story about when he was 9 years old and his grandmother made him promise him 3 things: that he would always love his mother, he would never drink alcohol, and he'd always do the right thing. He tells you a personal story about value. He's telling you in that story, and then he leads into the second part of his story about who are we as a people, and his call for action to end the death penalty. And it's really great, so if you take that framework and now look at it in different perspectives, you can start applying that to your own life. Does that make sense? And what I would do in that process is now take that and ask yourself questions. Tell me more about that coffee cup. Tell me more about that sunrise. If you imagine a really beautiful book or a beautiful movie, you're creating the picture and you're creating that tapestry. And what really matters is the climate, the texture. Texturize your story and allow me to picture it and go deeper into your story. You know what I mean? So you don't just say, my mother was a woman that had no fear, had no hate. She was like a lion. Right? So I'm giving you a description of a person. And that's something I can just add into my story, right? And you've already got a picture of who that person is.
Yeah, she sounds amazing.
Pretty cool, yeah.
She sounds incredible. There's a couple more questions that I've got for you before we wrap up. It feels we've spoken about such grand things, but I wanted to bring it back down to something that I think would really help assistants, and it's that idea that stories stick, and it's those things that we remember, as you said, giving texture to an idea. It's the stories that stick with us, and it's often the stories that you find out about people that makes you remember the person. And one of the things that assistants have to do a lot is work with data and help their executives make sense of data and weaving a story around it. So I wondered if there's any advice you can give to assistants that have to put presentations together and work with data, and how to make that kind of more, I hate to say boring, but more dry material into something that can be something.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, data. Consider qualitative data on a par, if not equal to, or more powerful than quantitative data, right? So remember, story is data, right? Story is your experience, and collecting that material. And maybe when you're beginning, I'm going to tell you this statistic. I'm trying to think of an example of, I want to give you some data, a percentage of how many people, blah, 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 blah. But I want to tell you about an experience. So, for example, I've been using quantitative data to explain us as an organization and our festival, etc., and X number of people that we've been able to reach. Percentage-wise, 52% of people said that they now want to visit Appalachia after participating in one of our programs. But more importantly, somebody said to me and emailed me, and he said to me that you brought us together after 9/11 when our nation needed to heal. And because of that, I believe that you're going to be able to bring us together again. When I spoke to my board directors, I started with that. That speaks to the heart, it speaks to your mission, it speaks to your value, it speaks to what people think about you. And then I said, can I follow up with data?
Yeah, I think that's
really storytelling is data with a heartbeat, right?
That's a great quote. I love that. I think it's so important for assistants to offer that support to their executives, because it's creating those narratives, isn't it, that make the organisation, make the people in the organisation come with the executive on the story of the organisation and where they want it to go. And it's tough to do that without storytelling.
Right. Sure. Story can back data up as well. So you think about, this was really interesting. This is that. Did you see? You could maybe kind of relate it to something that's very relevant that's going on now, or something like that. For example, you could relate something to. We launched an event right after the death of George Floyd, and we called it "Do Black Lives Matter in Appalachia," and 302,000 people participated. right? But then somebody, people came in and said what they said is that they really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that's really in their hearts, that they haven't got other places to do that. And that was really gives the essence and the meaning and the rationale why we're doing what we're doing. But I could still put a percentage in there. I could still put, how many people it reached. But who are you reaching? Remember those micro moments. Like I could tell you 10,000 people came. But if I tell you the experience of one child, of how it changed their life, how it made them think differently, that's going to resonate with you or the person. And hearing from that one person now wants to be an artist because they participated, now wants to be, it changed the way they think. You know what I mean? Like, you see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so powerful, and it's something that we do quite often without really thinking about it. And I think if you can harness the ability to tell stories with intention, then I think that's going to just hugely impact the impact that you bring to the organisation and to your role and to your career. Because it's quite often the stories that we tell ourselves as well that can create a negative impact. So I wondered if there's any advice you can give to assistants that are telling themselves negative stories. There's something that we say in the assistant industry around just being an assistant, and that really holds us back in our opinions and going into meetings and things like that, because we don't necessarily feel like we should be there. So I wonder if you have any advice around stopping those negative stories that we tell ourselves.
I mean, yes, to some degree, but remember that when I talk about who has the microphone, who doesn't, remember often your system is the microphone. You are the person that is you are the story collector to some degree of your organization. So the story being told is a series of different stories of different people. You can speak to a group of people because you can talk about what it means for a staff member, a colleague, a customer, or a client, and you have the power to be able to bring that together and curate it, to shape it, and who gets told, where it gets told. There's no, and I think the story that one tells themselves. Now, all of us are constantly, we wake up every day, we tell a story to ourselves. I'm not good enough, or I can't do this, or I can, or whatever. That's a human trait, right? But it's one that what I would suggest is re-examining that. And they don't necessarily try to get a story to replace it, but how can that traumatic or how can that difficult experience, how can the story of that I tell myself that, how can you empower that story? How can you infuse power into that experience? For example, when I had a lot of negative experiences growing up, I kept feeling like I was not good enough. I wasn't able to be accepted, and I had these violent experiences, but I could take aspect that has given story I now tell myself, that has given me a sense of understanding, of empathy, that helped me be a better educator when I'm working with kids. It allows me to empathize. I understand the pain to some degree, and I can empathize with that to allow me, I am in a really good position to be able to understand others, at least to understand other people's perspectives. And that's really important to me, to create that space. And I want all people to feel like their stories matter, because I know the experience of what it feels like to be marginalized, to be kept out, to be sidelined. You know what I mean? And so I take that experience and I can relate that to another person. So I think it's worth doing, to examine it in a way, why are you saying that, and how can you tell it in a different way? Remember, it doesn't have to be all celebratory. It has to have meaning. It has to be meaningful to you for it to be, it's your story. So believe in it yourself before, and then if you really believe in it, then it becomes believable, if that makes sense. You're not marketing, you get into the essence of your humanity, your DNA.
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely the case. If you continue to tell those negative stories, it's going to manifest itself in some way. So as you said, either using it as fuel to fire yourself into a more positive frame of mind where you're using it to move forward, I think is such a powerful thing, as I said, especially for assistants who maybe have been told that they can't do the things that they know that they can do, or add the value that they know they can, or being sidelined in the organisation. It's using that as fuel for your fire. I think it's so valuable.
Remember, it's a David and Goliath, right? Any narrative can be challenged. And I think about really big ones, like, for example, when we think about the civil rights movement in the United States, we go to Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was someone that refused to give up her seat based on inequality, and she helped spark a bus boycott. There was the Greensboro sit-in when 4 black men refused to give up their table at a table. These are micro moments, but they speak to the greater power of challenging the narrative. We think of the Middle East, we think of Northern Ireland, we think of wherever it is. These narratives are so powerful, but the individual stories can be really empowering, and that can override that narrative. Not one single story, it may be a series. And you think of, well, where are your micro moments, micro stories that speak to challenge that greater narrative? And how, imagine the narrative is like an arc, and stories are kind of like you're pushing and you're shifting that slowly, and the narrative shifts. The more assistants tell their stories about the importance of what does it mean to be an assistant, we shift the narrative of the story of the assistant, the greater narrative.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's one of the reasons I started Practically Perfect PA, was for that exact reason, that somebody in my organisation made an assumption about me and the role that I had at the time. He said to me, he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm an assistant." And he said, "Did you never have ambition?" And it was that moment of somebody projecting their idea of what I did on me that made me start Practically Perfect PA, because it was that moment that I thought, this is so common. This idea of what we do is so common across the organisations that I've worked in, that we need stories about assistants who are adding incredible value. And that's how I started Practically Perfect PA. So that was my story, a moment in time that made me shift my focus on what I was doing. So storytelling it can completely change your perspective.
You were really motivated by a challenge, and a comment. It's like when my friend who's in Scotland, and she's devout Muslim, wears hijab, and she works at a prison, and someone said to her, you could never cycle from Glasgow to Fort William. So the next morning she got up and she cycled the whole way, right? She wanted to prove them wrong. So I think the idea of taking that idea really resonates, and I think finding your places of empowerment. Remember, we've been building resilience since day one, ever since we're toddlers, and we build resilience all the time. And often we have to consider ourselves, well, are you an assistant, or are you on the front line of interacting with every aspect, every face, every component? You are on the front line. At front line, you were hearing the stories first, right? So it's considering that place of, sort of challenging that. Defining it for yourself.
Absolutely. One of the reasons I wanted you to open up the Future Assistant for us is that we have a week now of learning ahead of us, which opens up a whole world of possibilities for our attendees of where they're going to take the learning over the next week, and how it's going to open up their possibilities going forward in their role and their career, and taking with them the stories that they can tell from this week that's going to hugely impact their careers. So, Kiran, for now, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us on our opening keynote session. It's been really, really wonderful and really thought-provoking. So I appreciate your time so much.
Nicola, thank you. I love connecting with someone from back home.
Similar accent.
Sometimes it's like, I'm in a different world. I am sometimes, but it's great to connect with someone from back home.
Brilliant. And you, take care.
All right, take care.
Thank
Have
you.
a great week. Have a great everyone.